morning, everyone. Welcome to this Unconference session, EOS Collaborative Frontiers to Achieve Interoperability and Enhance Scholarly Data. This is a session that was planned and co-organized by 4 of the Horizon Europe projects, the Infra-EOSC project, GRASPOS, SciLake, OS Trails, and FairCore for EOSC. I am Stefania Amodeo from OpenAir, and I'll be the chair today. We will focus mainly on one interoperability framework that is an international framework, the Scientific Knowledge Graph. And we will hear from some representatives of the research communities that are involved in developing and testing and implementing the framework. And we will navigate through some application of these research discovery, data, metadata management, aspects like fairness, interconnectivity, machine actionability, bibliometric analysis, and research assessment. And the goal today is to discuss how we can bring this work together and move it forward towards the EOSC interoperability framework. We will have 4 speakers for pitch presentations. I will introduce them now so that we can have a smooth transition later. We will start with Thanasis Vergoulis from Athena Research Center. Thanasis is involved in several European initiatives in open science. Is the director of operations at OpenAir and is involved in several projects, and in particular is the project coordinator of SciLake and GRASPOS, and also a member of the Research Data Alliance SKG interoperability framework. And he will give us an introduction and tell us about the status of this SKG interoperability framework and the challenges in EOSC onboarding. We will also have Ellie Papadopoulou from Athena Research Center. She's the deputy coordinator of the OS Trails project, and she will talk about the steps toward fairness, interconnectivity, and machine actionability across all research phases. We also have Matt Bays, the executive director of DataSite and member of FairCore for EOSC, and he will give us insights from the network of repository managers. And Andrea Manocci from the Italian National Research Center. He's participating in GRASPOS with a pilot on national research organization, and is also a co-chair of the RDA SKG interoperability framework group. And he will talk about applications on research assessment and bibliometric analysis. We will dedicate half an hour to this pitch presentations, and then we will have the second part of the session, a discussion about what are the next steps to make in EOSC. This will be moderated by my colleague, Giulia Malaguarnera from OpenAir. Prepare your smartphones, because as always, we have the Slido for questions, so you can start including your comments and questions while the speakers will present, and then we will display this later, and we will use your input for the discussion session. So thank you very much. Enjoy and participate with your inputs and ideas. Tanasi, please come on stage.
Okay, thanks, Stefania, for the introductions, and thanks everyone for the interest in SKG interoperability. Before going into the details of the interoperability framework that we are using in the context of several EOSC-related projects, I would like to provide some background about the motivation of this work. So in the recent years, we are experiencing the creation of a large ecosystem of scientific knowledge graphs. They are very diverse to each other, and we have different kinds of them. some of them being more universal and inclusive, others focusing on particular subjects of interest. Here I have included on this slide just a small part of those initiatives that are trying to create scientific knowledge graphs, at least the most popular and most widely known. But as this ecosystem evolves and as more and more scientific knowledge graphs are being added to that, you can understand that there is a need to make them interoperable. And at the point that the initiatives that we are going to discuss started, the whole landscape was not that structured. We have every scientific knowledge graph basically having its own data model. For instance, here I have added a couple of examples of the graph data models of opener graph, of dimensions, OpenAlex, but for sure you can see that they are very different to each other. So this creates a lot of problems in cases where people would like to build added value applications on top of those graphs and provide services to the users. So as you can understand, if the data model was aligned of each of these knowledge graphs, this work would be much easier. And this is the main motivation of the SKG interoperability framework. This is more or less a framework that is trying to define a metadata model that will facilitate the interoperability between the SKGs and also help the third-party developers of added value services to create SKG-based content by helping them in the consumption of the contents. Of course, this group did not start from scratch. The idea was to get inspired by the models of existing well-known SKGs, like those that I have included in the previous slide, and more importantly, this model is being created by various organizations that are building those knowledge graphs, and some of them, like Opener, like Open Citations and DataCite, they have they are trying to make their own graph models aligned to that, and they have a roadmap to make it complete, to make them completely aligned. Finally, it is important to mention that the SKGIF model is intended to be part of the wider EOSC interoperability framework. If you would like to find more details about the SKGIF data model, you can follow the links that I have included in the slide. But I will just provide a very quick overview of the main components because we don't have now the time to see it in a lot of detail. The main model is what I am currently presenting on the slide. The central entity type is the research product one that can be literature, data, software, or other types of research products. Then we have also the entity of grants about the funded projects, topics which refer to areas of interest inside particular disciplines, the data sources that are providing the metadata of related to the research products, the venues where the research products are being published, like journals, like conferences, and so on. And finally, the agent entity type, which refers to either person, to either people, researchers, or organizations. And for each of these entity types, there are a lot of details on the website of the SKGIF framework that you can find. So if you click on the agent page, you see something like that, providing details about the respective fields, about the values that they can take, and things like that. And this is a work in progress, as I indicate here, because currently the group that is building this model will conclude its work until the end of the year, when we expect to have the first mature version of this model. So a little bit of history about that. This is the group that is creating this framework. Is hosted by Research Data Alliance. This started by an interest group in RDA that several people were involved. Before that, it was self-organized in task forces. And at some point, this transitioned to a working group in RDA that is called the Scientific Knowledge Graphs Interoperability Framework Working Group. You can find all the details in the respective links that I have included in the slide, and you can find the names of the chairs here as well. And one of them, the co-chairs, is Andrea Manozzi, that you will have in the next presentation. Okay, so the roadmap is about creating, first involves creating the SKG core information model. This is an ongoing activity. Currently, as I said, we are at the process of finalizing everything until the end of the year. Then there is the activity of determining the metadata formats that will be used, and currently there is a transition from a JSON format to a JSON LTD that was selected as a more appropriate. Apart from that, there is some work on creating an API, a resolver API specification that can be used for API deployments that would serve the SKGs, exposing their data. Finally, as I will explain in my last slide, there is a need for extensions because a group like this that is creating a specification for scientific knowledge graph can provide the specification only for those entities that are widely used by all the SKGs. But as expected, if we are talking about graphs that are tailored to particular disciplines, they may involve some discipline-related entities, and it is not sustainable for a generic group to keep up to date the data model to include this type of entities. So yeah, the focus is on domain agnostic entities, relationships and properties, and what is being done right now by the SKGIF group is to create a clear and extension mechanism that can be used by other groups that would like to extend the basic data model so that they can create their own specification for particular domains. And with that said, I would like to just give some seconds about one of the motivation examples in one of the projects, the SciLake project. The project is trying to create SKGs in 4 different disciplines: neuroscience, cancer research, transport research, and energy research. And of course, the graphs that these communities are creating in their core, they involve the core entities that we saw, and that they are involved in the SKGIF model. But of course, there are some domain-specific entities that should be involved as well. And there is some activity in creating an official extension or 4 official extensions, one for each of the pilot areas of the SKGIF, so that this will be a blueprint for everyone that would like to create their own knowledge graph. And in that way, those knowledge graphs will be aligned not only to generic ones like OpenEarth or Open Citations, but also to other graphs in the same discipline as well. And with that said, I will give the mic to Ellie for the next. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I think I'm shorter than this. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Ellie Papadopoulou. I work for Athena Research Center, affiliated in OpenAir. I am very lucky to be the deputy coordinator of OSTRLs. The actual coordinator is over there, first row, Natalia Manola. But I'm very fortunate because this is a very motivating consortium of 40 diverse organizations. So we can learn from each other how we manage data in different contexts, national, institutional, and thematic contexts, and also more European-wide. So what we aim to do is increase the fairness of different digital objects, connect different research outputs, actors, and activities together, and also promote machine actionability in different, promote machine actionability, so understand what actions we need to do to create the metadata for machines to be able to quickly retrieve and automate processes. Now, OS Trails, Open Science Trails, looks at 3 pillars: planning, tracking, and assessing. And in doing that, we bring together many core services for scientific knowledge graphs, for data management plans, and for fair assessment tools. This is an outline, but I will skip it because I don't have time, and I know I can talk a lot. Let me give you a definition, though, because in some conversations, there is this, let's say, confusion of what a graph is. We are not talking about only visualizing a database to see it as a graph, you know, as we saw in the keynote. For example, we're talking about databases, relational databases, repositories that are exposing, they're classifying and they're contextualizing the data and are exposing them according to the scientific knowledge graph interoperability framework that we saw before in Thanas's presentation, via suitable APIs, of course. So in OS Trails, an SKG is any even repository that can expose this information according to this model. Now, what are the limitations? Because we see we're not only focusing on scientific knowledge graphs, but we bring DMPs and fair assessment into the table. So the limitations at the moment are that DMPs have been created for many years now, right, as a requirement of the Horizon, Horizon and the Horizon Group, but there's no evidence that they actually result in better research data management or that their results are fair because of a good structured and written DMP. At the same time, they're not published and they're not treated as outputs themselves, so they don't apply the FAIR principles, meaning that you cannot find it and you cannot reuse it, or if you do, you're not sure how to treat them, how to reuse them. There's uncertainty still. Researchers don't know where to start, don't know how much detail to put on the DMP. So these are questions that we need to answer at some point. And we see that the DDPs are the domain data protocols. These are essentially domain-specific templates for DMPs. They have been suggested by Science Europe, but they are pending adoption. So we are, we need to also deal with that. And that's why we want to create machine actionable DMPs, so push for machine actionable DMPs that describe the DMP entities and their links with other sources. Now, for scientific knowledge graphs, we heard by Thanasis the diversity with PID graphs, other more scientific knowledge graphs, and so on. And they mostly cover bibliometrics, because the more mature was the, in terms of citations also, is publications. So they cover bibliometrics, not data, and they're mostly used for discovery, not assessment, for example. They have been developed in isolation. There are quality issues because the different sources where we get the data have different workflows and processes. Some, for example, self-archiving might not have curation behind it because there might not be someone, a data librarian, a data steward, or someone to curate the data. So we have these quality issues. And more information that is coming from communities that we don't know about. For example, instruments, that are used and so on. That's why we want to promote the context of machine actionable DMPs. Now for fair, we see everyone wants fair results, policies require it, national funders, institutions, so on, but the funding is lacking for implementation. There is inconsistency in results. If you've used any fair assessment tool, and if you use the same data set across one or two different fair assessment tools, you will see that you get different results, and that's because although we have the fair maturity model, that we get the metrics, the fair metrics from there, the different providers interpret them differently, so that's why the inconsistency happens. And then there's no fair assessment schema, so the results, we don't know how to describe them. And also there is still confusion between fair and data quality. So fair doesn't mean that the data are, of good quality. It means that they can be machine readable and actionable. And we aim to increase the landscape for with machine actionable fair tests. Now, to do that, we worked on understanding the pathways across these core services that we have in the consortium. And here is the user actions and what they do when they go to repositories, they deposit their information and so on. You can see, I have to skip, unfortunately, because I don't have much time. And here you see also the tools actions. So users actions and tools actions, what the tools can perform. Right? Where they can retrieve information, where they can push information to, and so on. Now, the framework that we're working is this. This is a draft plan, track, assess framework. You can see how the different tools react and users can react, and what is the information they give to each other. The interoperability frameworks that we have been drafting are three. Of course, we take our legacy is RDA. I'm also fortunate to be a co-chair of the active DMPs, and Tomasz, our technical manager from TU Wien, is also the co-chair involved in this project. And we are extending, as you can see, with those interfaces for input and output, for SKGs DMPs. For fair tools, we are, unfortunately, there's no standard at the moment of how to exchange fair assessment results, for example. So we are creating this with the 6 fair assessment tools that we have in the project. We have 15 pilots, 15 national pilots, you can see, and 8 thematic pilots across the 5 clusters, plus a Horizon Europe to implement this interoperability framework and expose data according to the scientific knowledge graph interoperability framework, enhance them with new entities as instruments, different thematic entities, increase the quality of the data so that they are classified with the correct resource types and they have annotations to understand what's happening, and then rich metadata. This is an example of the commons that we are working on. And of course, thank you very much to the wonderful consortium. Thank you.
Great. My name is Matt Bass. I won't spend too much time on that. I'll jump right in here. Really just to start to provide some context where I'm coming from in the few slides that I'll talk through. I'm the Executive Director at DataCite. DataCite is a global community. Really, we're a community of research organizations that manage and run various types of repositories, databases, catalogs, so from generalist repositories like Zenodo to more specific biodiversity like GBIF to preprints from archive, and so everything from samples to data sets to DMPs to instruments, we support in terms of persistent identifier metadata registration, and then making that openly discoverable and available through various open APIs, and GraphQL API also is something that's very relevant to some of the context here. We also play a role in Fair Call for EOSC, and so I'm representing both some insights from repository managers or database repositories, catalog managers, to also the Fair Call for EOSC development work that we're doing, where we're focusing on building a core component around the persistent identifier graph, and I'll talk a bit about how this interoperates and some of the work we're doing to build a cohesive ecosystem and avoid duplication. Bit of background around the persistent identifier graph. This was launched a couple of years ago in Project Freya, and this was really the first of I guess some of the initial persistent identifier graphs that were coming out, is that working on understanding how we connect these different things together. So this author is from this institution that produced this publication that cited this data set, and we can make these links and relationships all over, but really making that machine actionable and possible for machines and users to address these user stories that we developed, and these are still available online. And so we built out the architecture to do this, and really that continues for the work that we're doing now within Fair Call for EOSC in scaling up that graph. As I mentioned, it's not just datasets, publication software. There's a wide variety here. There's DMPs, instruments, preprints, and so those aren't in these visualizations, but really just giving you an idea of how we scale up and how we want to continue to work on building a connected ecosystem. One thing that I'll note is that we often have challenges around metadata quality, and so with the publication workflow, that goes through quite a rigorous curation process, and publishers going through a very set process on that. In some cases, we have in more open tools and services, we have things like My Dataset or Dataset 1 as the title for it. And so these are challenges that we have in the graph. And so I also don't want to pretend that everything that we do as an ecosystem is perfect, but the good news is we have ways and technology that we're working on, and particularly with the SKG that I'll talk about now, to improve that quality. And so bringing this to the repositories, really repositories registering persistent identifiers. DataCite provides a service around DOI registration, but we're also agnostic in the graph in terms of what persistent identifier there is. The key piece that we need is technology that allows us to resolve metadata for that persistent identifier. And so if there's no easy way to do that, there's no easy way for us to build this or bring this into the graph. And so that's just a basic thing that we need to try address. That being said, we're really open to collaborating and working with as many domain-specific persistent identifiers, et cetera, to bring these in. And so within Fair Call for EOSC, the big effort is both scaling up the graph, but also making sure that it's really easy to harvest this metadata and understand these relationships, so that we can do these two hops. We can understand that this DMP was related to this data set that was related to this grant, or this sample was related to this organization that was funded by this organization. And so doing these hops is really important in addressing those downstream use cases. Sorry, just looking at the time there. I'm not good at multitasking. And so these relations are really the key. And so what's really important is thinking about the SKG and our efforts within the graph is that we want to make sure that as this matures, that we can build an ecosystem. We want to avoid duplication of efforts. As you've heard here, there's different types of graphs, and there's different national graphs, there's different regional graphs, there's different focus-specific graphs. Really what we should be doing is leveraging this to make sure that we have a common way to make interoperability possible, but also take it a step further and actually do that interoperability. And so when we have things like my data set, we can look across using this framework to actually share metadata across these systems and actually improve the quality, but also address the different use cases that we have across these. And so we're working when the new standard, the JSON LD standardized approach is finalized, to implement that within our outputs and data dumps that we'll be producing, but also then implementing this into our API. So things like content negotiation, you can put in ORCID and simply get back a standard representation, or any tool that uses content negotiation, you could implement that. And so for repositories, the impact really brings that it enhances the reuse for you as a repository, and in making sure that your metadata about your research outputs and resources are discoverable and available within these graphs. And through this interoperability, it's a broader ecosystem, and really, you know, for me, I'm really proud that it's an open ecosystem. All the metadata is CC0, it's open to use, and that's really important that we as a open science community advocate for that. We're working to streamline the ingestion across different systems. We can start overlaying some of the metadata with usage and statistics, understanding how these different outputs and resources were linked, so both with citations, but also those different relation types give us different insights. And so that also brings that contextual metadata that we're talking about. And then aggregated persistent identifier links really gives us a bit more understanding for those downstream use cases. What I'll say is that what we're doing doesn't address every use case, but it's part of this layered approach and ecosystem. And so if you come to the persistent identifier graph as a researcher trying to discover research, you probably won't get far, because it's really designed to understand relationships between persistent identifiers and the metadata and be able to harvest that via APIs. But in more research-specific context, so a research graph, or a research discovery graph, there's more technology built to actually support that use case. And so it's important that we understand across these different efforts that there's different use cases and different ways that we can collaborate and support each other in building out the ecosystem. And with that, I will hand over.
So, hi. Last bit. I'll try to be quick. So all the consideration in this presentation stem from two contexts. Parts of the project GraspOS, which is about the construction of a infrastructure for responsible research assessment, and I'm also a member of the Quora working group towards open infrastructure for responsible research assessment again. So both contexts exactly focus on open research for this purpose. And here the dream that we are trying to sell is basically moving away, or if you prefer, complement this rather monopolistic situation that we witness now, where two power players are mostly getting all the attention whenever from people that are performing assessment exercises or performance evaluation in research, to a broader spectrum of providers and tools and services that can offer data that can be mixed and matched by whomever has to design such assessment processes, or scientometricians that are working on research evaluation. So this need is that underpins this rise of open infrastructure for research assessment. And so the intended usage here of the SKGIF is basically as a glue, so gluing together and enabling this exchange of information between the different players that can be composed and together. And here we don't have any picture about these kind of infrastructures because we are drafting documents now, so it's mostly text. And I needed one picture, and I provided the text of this slide to Dali, and he came up with these 4 pictures that I was surprised to see. I was looking at. I mean, I would expect something like a brick with some glue oozing out. And it prompted me back something that's always, like a circle where in the middle you see people, the word knowledge or science, and then there's a multitude of different things around. And I found it like, I like that. Okay, I will include that. It's not what I was expecting, but still good. And so yeah, basically the interoperability framework is intended as exchange language mostly. And with respect of scientometrics, bibliometric inquiry, or in any case research assessment, it falls short in a few bits. The fields that are described now in the core model of the interoperability framework are mostly focused on bibliometric metadata, and there is no coverage for indicators. So basically, if you need to compute anything, you just have to crunch numbers, which is really inconvenient if you are an end user. And there is no inclusion for narratives, which are central, for example, in the research assessment reform promoted by Hoare. So what we are trying to do within the framework, within the effort of GraspOS, we want to use the SKGIF extension mechanism that Thanasis was explaining in the introduction, so that to create an extension that targets the specificity of the project and include and specify indicators as decorators of the various entities, could be research products, persons, organizations, or grants, and we want to include also accountability for indicators, to trying to be as specific as possible about the methodology that indicator have been calculated with, validity, if there's any, like a certain computation at a given time has been done under certain assumptions, it might expire over time because it's not fresh anymore. And we also need to include narratives. We think that could be another entity that can be promoted by the extension. And that could tackle different points. Could be about just a single research product, so telling a story about a data set or a service or just a paper, and collecting all the evidence and impact evidence that research product produced. Or it could be about a stream of different research products trying to tell an overarching story about a stream of research. And then we need to focus also on APIs, because at the moment the APIs that are within the specification are really bare bones, and we might need something more within the context of GraspOS, but at the moment we haven't deepened that discussion yet. We are still scratching the surface of what is needed to be done. And with this, I'm done.
Thank you, Andrea. Thanks to all the speakers. So you can join here the seats. So we start the discussion. Before I start reading the 11 questions that are already on Slido, let me see if there is, if you still want to add some questions and you came after. Okay, so here we have the first question. Can someone bring the microphone here, please? I can talk loud. It's better.
So thank you to all the speakers for the very interesting presentation. I have a question. I hope it's it's not trivial, but in the structure of the knowledge graph, the research data are in the core, if I understand, and all the other metadata are not the discipline-specific metadata. So the discipline-specific metadata are included in the research data, or are they connected in some other part of the knowledge graph? I didn't get this point.
Okay, so first of all, we don't consider everything else apart from publications or dataset to be just metadata of the research products. We think that those entities by themselves are interesting and maybe also important entity types that have different structure, interesting interactions with the other entities and things like that. So if we're talking regarding the domain-specific knowledge, we expect that parts of this knowledge will be just fields inside the entity types like the research data, the research products that you mentioned, but we also expect additional entity types in the model, like for instance, if we are talking about cancer research. You could have an entity related to drugs, another one related to diseases, another related to genes. All these could be different entities connected via various types of relationships with publications, with datasets, with people. So this is more or less the idea of encoding the domain-specific knowledge inside the model.
I think I'll just add there that every graph has its own schema, and so it will have a standard schema. The SKG brings a common format to exchange that metadata, but there's also technologies that exist. So within DataCite and in the persistent identifier graph, we have a schema, but you can actually query via content negotiation forward the header along to a repository or a database and get that specific metadata that sits there in that repository, which in almost all cases would be domain specific or context specific metadata. So there's technologies that exist, but every graph will have some sort of schema that they use. And so it really depends on your use case, what you're looking for. In some cases, going directly to, and that's where the SKG does also apply to specific repositories. They can make their metadata available within that format, but there's also specific metadata that they have.
Thank you.
And we have a little provocative question here. Do we need the SKG's interoperability framework at all? Isn't it easier to agree that each SKGs must use Dublin core or data size to model the basic non-domain dependent entities?
If I can start. First of all, to agree on something, you need to have a working group or something like that. And this was exactly the motivation of creating this particular RDA working group. So the situation was that we had all these different graphs out there following their various formats on how to make available the data that they are creating. And this particular group tried to bring together representatives from different initiatives trying to agree on something. So if Dublin Core was one such option, they could agree on that. Now I will give the mic to Andrea, maybe, who is more appropriate to answer the question, why not Dublin Core, for instance. But at least in my mind, it seems like Dublin Core is a good basis. It has, of course, influenced a lot of different graph data models out there, so it's not that this will not be considered at all, but at least it does not provide everything that is needed. There is nothing related, as far as I can understand, related to grants, for instance, or the relationships are not that important in Dublin Core, in my opinion. But again, we didn't start from scratch. And what we did was exactly that. We tried to make people agree on something that will be used by everyone.
No, yeah, I mean, Dublin Core has a flat representation of bibliographic fields. I mean, which is great for, you know, in open air, we aggregate content in Dublin Core. But if, I mean, it's exactly what you were saying. The methodology that we had at the beginning was looking at different initiatives, and we tried to have to factorize the similarities, and it looked like we had some ways to model different entities and the manifold relations that these may have, and it looked to us that it wasn't appropriate to just limit to what Dublin Core can offer, and we had to go beyond that. That's.
And maybe Matt, would you like to comment why not data site model?
Yeah, because well, I mean, yes. So you know, I think there's all of these things. There's the short answer is that it doesn't address all use cases, and we're trying to bring convergence in a community across these different standards and implementations, and particularly when we look across different research outputs and resources and the different types of relationships. And what I mean by that is we can look at traditional research outputs like publications, data sets. Those things are a bit more standardized in terms of data site and Dublin Core schema. But if we look at now a grant ID or a sample, and that's work that we're doing in data site, is to really change those relationship types and control terms within our schema. But again, the SKG is looking to address this more holistically across the group. And so the short answer is no, they're not ideal for covering all of these use cases. We might find that some of these, I guess, implementations also align more closely with the SKG over time. But the important thing is that we have a common standard format to ensure interoperability.
Thank you. And maybe for Ellie, this question. Are MADU the same of FDUs?
Machine actionable digital objects?
Yes.
The same as fair digital objects?
Yes.
No, because I think for fair digital, the FDO is something, is a concept behind, like we define digital objects differently. We define them as any digital artifact that is a data set, a software. So it's not the digital record, the structure of the digital object as it's you know, defined in the FDO.
Data.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, Mark.
Hi, it's Mark Dietrich from EGI. I get I'm hearing that SKG is really building from the bibliometric world. You're trying to extend into some of the other areas. You're looking at, for example, data site, but I also know that there are a lot of standards, for example, from W3C that are being adopted, and I'm not hearing those words. I'm not hearing SCOS, I'm not hearing PROV, I'm not hearing DCAT, and I'm wondering what discussion there has been in terms of aligning with these. I ask this question because EOSC is a data space. Under the Data Act, Article 33, there are going to be some legal regulations applied to EOSC about how it presents its data. And it's going to need to follow certain harmonized standards that are being set by the Commission. We don't know what that process looks like, but they're unlikely to be taking proprietary standards. They're very likely to be taking other standards that are in the community. So anyway, thoughts on the evolution and process?
So recently, I mean, Silvio's here, second row, and we are transitioning the repositories to GitHub, and as a new, so in the meanwhile, we are transitioning to JSON LD. And if you rifle through the properties in the JSON context, you can see DCAT. There are, I mean, the fields are pointing to known ontologies in the domain, and we are building on top of Spire ontologies, which it's it's one of the biggest, I mean, not standard, but ontologies that are modeling this kind of domain, and it's pointing to lots of different different contributions from and formats from other working groups and other persons that have been doing this business so far. So it's not we are not really inventing the wheel with the N+1 standard. We are trying to capitalize on previous effort and be synergic with that, rather than proposing something that just new from scratch just for the sake of it.
Thank you. Anyone else wants to comment? No? Any other questions from the audience, or I pass here? Okay. So when we talk about SKGs, are the concepts from semantic web relevant here? Sorry, someone voted. For example, do we expect SKGs to follow ontologies, provide data as triples, and so on?
Well, yeah, potentially. There's again in the new repository. So the intended exchange format at the moment is JSON LD, but you can triplify that easily. Then my concern would be, once you have all the triples, good luck finding a system that scale out with the complexity. That's a different kind of thing. But yeah, in theory, yes.
And also something important to mention is that the SKGIF is trying to define a common way to share, to expose the data. So how the data are being organized internally for the graph itself is more or less irrelevant. So this is a specification on how to share the SKG data to third parties.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, which is true. Like at the origin, I think the focus on the working group was about different initiatives that are housing information about scholarly knowledge of some kind, and the idea was to have a way to synchronize at least a small subset of properties. Let's say OpenAir and, I don't know, DataCite and Open Citations and Crossref. Whatever is at the intersection, the original idea was whatever is at the intersection, it's possible to exchange it, and without having always to have one-on-one mappings between different systems. So that was what was the origin. Then all the communities and diversity about specificity of disciplines has been plugged into the framework. But yeah, I mean that was the original spirit. That it's about exchange of at least some commons.
Thank you, Andrea. And still for you, the RDA SKGIF documentation examples are about scholarly publications. I find it very difficult to reuse for services, API serving data, for instance.
Because, so for example, again, services, it could be a very well suitable new entity that could be considered in extensions. And we have, I think within the OS Trails, I think it's going to be something that's going to be addressed. So yeah, I mean that's a given. You can't have you can't find a place to house metadata about services within a core specification of the model. That we know that because in the system that we analyzed at the beginning, there was no. I mean, services were not represented, so we knew they were important, but we had to try to put a line on something. We had so here is the line. The rest, everything that falls outside, doesn't mean it's not important. It means that it cannot be addressed and covered by the core. So it's not disregarding. It's just for the. It was just a decision, pragmatically speaking, for feasibility and traceability of the problem. Otherwise, we wouldn't finish.
And also something important to add is that, if I'm not mistaken, we have two different ways to extend the model. The one is the extensions, and the other one is considering extensions of the core model. So this core model will not be carved into stone. It will be something evolving in the future.
It still is.
And regarding the documentation, because this was also part of the question, currently the website is being heavily restructured, and you should take into consideration that the website is a work in progress. So if there are any insights or suggestions about how to improve the documentation of that, we are open to hear about that.
Thank you. And maybe in Noistral you have some example of fair tools that will be integrated in the future?
Not yet, because we just started. We actually just started publishing things, having results, drafts for the architecture. So you can go ahead on the website and look at, our preliminary results for the architecture, the interoperability frameworks that I mentioned, the pathways, but the final, let's say, results will come January, February. So, yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, for example, in GraspOS, I don't think we have candidates, good candidates within the extension that we are foreseeing at the moment that could be included in the core. Because indicators and narratives, I think they are specific to certain applications. But services, I think, if I had to put my money on something right now, like I think that services could be considered to be part of the core. And so the way, as Thanasis was saying, so it's either you engage with the working group and you champion your propositions in there, or you by representing a group of people, a project, or an application, particular application, you can develop, apply for an extension, develop that outside the working group, and then once the extension is done, if proven to be useful, then we can engage, the working group can engage in a discussion where certain things can be cherry-picked and ported back to the core itself. That's the intended maintenance workflow that's, I mean, for the months to come.
Thank you. Are there any last question from the audience? Okay, here.
Thank you. So now that OpenAir has migrated to the scientific knowledge graph framework, interoperability framework, will any support for schema.org be just caught? Is there any plan to support also schema.org, or?
At some point, I think we discussed that, but Silvio, I think that the discussion at some point was, I mean, it dropped once we decided to transition to JSON LD. I think you know better, but that was...
So I remember the discussion about using schema.org and creating specific profiles for schema in order to expose data by using schema.org. We were in front of two main issues here. One is time frame, I would say. And when we moved to, we decided to use JSON LD as format for representing the data. We have created a context, JSON LD context, for providing, at least right now, a possible description of the data share with SKGIF in RDF by using existing ontology. We didn't want to create yet a new thing right now. That was the idea, because we need a lot of time for doing that properly, and so we wanted to reuse existing standards and ontology that are already reused within the community exactly for that purpose. A few things from schema.org actually are adopted within the context. So right now is, in order to have something viable, we just decided to reuse what is available right now from different models and data models and ontologies. Schema.org, DCAT, PROV, Sparrow ontologies, Dublin code, just to mention a few that we are actually reusing within the data model that is behind the scenes of SKGIF. In the future, I mean, this is just a starting point, okay? So if in the future the community would like to, in principle, migrate the current data model within a schema.org defined profile that covers the entire aspects described there, we will work on that. That's the point, but it is a community effort, in my opinion. So it's something to be discussed. Right now, it is adopted as other models there for modeling specific parts. That's the idea.
Thank you, Silvio. And okay, Paolo.
Yeah, just to clarify the first part of your question, you asked, in your question, you mentioned the fact that OpenAIRE has adopted or migrated to SKGIF, because that's not exactly the case. So we are supporting the SKGIF because we want to share data according to the model, but we are sharing data according to many models, right? So it doesn't mean that we are only SKGIF compliant. Or then compliance, it also has to do with the way you acquire information, not just in the way you expose it, in the case of SKGs, because we aggregate content. So we are compatible with many standards out there. We are adding on top of these SKGs because we hope it will be a sort of easy way to collect data from complex information systems that today are actually supporting different models, different APIs, different so whatever. So the idea is to facilitate the work for all of us. But still, we're keeping the previous standards, of course, so we're compatible with DataCite, we're compatible with the Dublin core, and so on. On the other side of the stream, when we are sharing stuff, it's, again, the same thing. We're sharing our content according to a list of standards, and now we're also doing it through the SKGIF, okay? So it's the hard job of aggregators.
And most SKGs will do this, still support multiple different formats and frameworks.
Thank you very much to everyone for being here. Unfortunately, we have to close this session, but we will try to make sort of FAQs to answer to all of your questions and maybe publish a news item very soon. So have a look at the newsletter of OS Trail, GraspOS, SciLake, Faircore for EOSC, OpenAIRE, and we will try also to contact the EOSC Symposium communication team, so you may read the answer to your questions. So thanks a lot for participating, and see you in the networking at the coffee break. Thank you.